1896, the United States of America. The fight for the presidency is fierce between the GOP nominee William McKinley and his Democratic contender William Jennings Bryan. The outcome of the election between the two Williams, who boasted radically different ideologies, would shape American politics for a century to come. McKinley ran on a platform of continuation, in line with the pro-business capitalist, albeit less expansionist policies of the former President Grover Cleveland. He held a likewise traditional campaign, delivering speeches in the front of his house in Canton, Ohio. William Jennings Bryan could not have run a more different campaign. First known to the general public for his inspired speeches in the defense of American workers, his program introduced the notion of a federal income tax on the wealthiest individuals and was fiercely anti-imperialism. Unlike McKinley, who remained in the comfort of his house, William J. Bryan embarked on a grand whistle-stop tour far and wide throughout the United States, delivering speeches in front of train stations and city halls alike. Although he eventually lost the presidency, William J. Bryan secured himself a name in American political history as the inventor of modern campaigning. His campaigning successes, however, would not have been possible were it not for the development of railroads in the 19th century US, and most critically the Pacific Railroad. Built during the intense Civil War, it linked, at its completion in May 1869, Sacramento, California, and the wider agricultural Central Valley to Omaha, Nebraska, and further eastwards the industrial regions of the Midwest and New England. Because it needed to be built from both ends, two companies were set up for its construction. The Central Pacific Railroad was put in charge of the western portion, while the eastern part was constructed by the Union Pacific Railroad. The idea to connect the two coasts via railroad first emerged in the late 1840s, amid a growing ideological support for Manifest Destiny. But another decade passed before any construction work began. As a matter of fact, the increasingly divided USA struggled to come to terms on the route to take. Southern states advocated for the track to go south through snow-free New Mexico territory, and conveniently through Texas and Louisiana. The North, meanwhile, advocated for a central route, which would improve access to gold fields in southern Wyoming and gold mines of Nevada. It wasn't until the outburst of the Civil War and the secession of southern states in 1861 that Congress, emptied of its southern senators, was able to agree on a budget and a route. The Pacific Railroad Act of 1862 was signed into law on the 1st of July by President Abraham Lincoln, and construction could finally begin. It was high time. There was growing concern in Washington, D.C. that the isolated state of California would follow the example of the Confederacy and declare its own independence. Indeed, the Golden State had often played with the idea of being an independent republic, a status it had only maintained for a mere month before its incorporation into the US, but which nonetheless left a deep mark in its culture. No one can fully comprehend today the level of isolation faced by inhabitants of the West Coast before the completion of the Pacific Railroad in 1869. Although other railroads had existed before, the network didn't go far beyond the Mississippi River. To travel from coast to coast, one would therefore need to take a months-long dangerous trip by cart and boat through high passes in the Rockies and down a tumultuous river. The alternative route was a long and weary shipment through the Panama Basin, where tropical diseases were common. CPR owner Theodore Judah would die from such diseases in 1863 whilst traveling on a business trip to New York City. The completion of the Pacific Railroad was of utmost importance and would have far-reaching consequences beyond the mere issues of traveling, as emphasized by a small media outlet of the Colorado Territory in 1866. The one moral, the one remedy for every evil social, political, financial and industrial, the one immediate vital need of the entire Republic, is the Pacific Railroad. This sentence has to be put back into the broader context of the American Civil War. In 1866, the North had just won on the Confederacy, but the Union was far from being secured and great effort was required to save it. Most importantly, the North needed to prove that its values, industrial capitalism and entrepreneurship, had the ascendance on Southern values. Indeed, the South, with its aristocratic and simple life ideals, viewed itself to be morally superior to the North. The construction of the railroad, a symbol of industrialism, would therefore show to the South that the Union was still capable of accomplishing great projects, while asserting its domination on the Wild West. French Louisiana had been purchased from Napoleon in 1803, but the Great Plains beyond the Missouri River had remained largely intact from American influence. The opening of the track improved access to the otherwise remote but fertile valley of the Platte River in Nebraska, whose population jumped from a mere 20,000 people in 1860 to 1 million in 1890. The construction of the railroad also had important economic repercussions. For one, it precipitated the growth of manufactures in California, vitally needed for construction works enterprised by the CPRR in the Sierra Nevada. Californian industrial output, which had remained stagnant during its Spanish era, rapidly grew from this point onward to become, today, the wealthiest and most populous state in the US. Although the first gold rush of 1848 had faced an abrupt end by the beginning of the 1860s, the Pacific Railroad, which passed near mining settlements in Nevada, improved food security for thousands of people. It would also foster a new wave of migration once new gold fields were discovered in Idaho, Utah and Montana territories. Progress, however, was slow. The leader of the Union Pacific Railroad, Thomas C. Durant, was not as interested in building a railroad as he was filling up his pocket with government subsidies. He delayed any significant work and increased the length of the railroad by laying out an oxbow-shaped route a few miles west of the eastern terminal. With a $50,000 grant per mile built, this proved rather profitable. This can partly be explained by the fact that traditional businessmen were wary to invest their money into building a railroad in the middle of nowhere. The line wouldn't bring any significant sources of revenue before its completion. To meet this issue, Thomas C. Durant founded the Crédit Immobilier of America, a cover-up company to lure his friends into investing in his construction. It had scandalous practices and embezzled millions of dollars from the federal government, as revealed by The Sun in 1872. But besides that, it was truly a small revolution in finance. Thanks to Crédit Immobilier, if the UPRR got into trouble, investors would not be held liable, as it was common practice before. They would only lose their investment. This paved the way for a broad upheaval of the way the stock market functioned and increased its already important influence on the American society, as investments became more secure. Yet, investors' wariness to invest into the UPRR was founded. Native populations in the plains and the Rocky Mountains viewed this westward expansion into their territory with a far from keen eye. Buffalo population, on which they heavily relied, were decimated by contingents of hunters who thought to push the herds away from the main railway track. Of the millions that had roamed the plains, only a few hundred survived at the end of the century, seeing their sacred animals and their primary means of subsistence being destroyed. Natives of the Cheyenne tribe soon retaliating, harassing construction labor and supply lines, impeding the construction work. Weakened by typhus and facing great food insecurities, members of the Cheyenne Nation were eventually forced to abandon their settlements and relocate away from the railroad. work on the Central Pacific Railroad was not faster. The tough mountainous terrain of the Sierra Nevada failed to attract any significant amount of workers who preferred to stay in the fields of the Central Valley. The company therefore hired Chinese migrants, who made up 80% of its workforce. Amid intense racism, they built sections of the railroad in the harshest of environments. After the completion of the project, Chinese workers were thanked with Jim Crow laws and increased segregation. This blatantly racist treatment of the workforce foreshadowed what was to come on the East Coast. In the following years, indeed, many rights acquired by freed slaves after the Civil War were gradually stripped away from them, as Republican President Ulysses S. Grant was forced to abandon Reconstruction by Southern Democrats. Going back to 1896, 3 decades after the publication of the Rocky Mountain News article, it is hard to realize that we stand in the same country. It is clear, however, that the picture would have been totally different if the Pacific Railroad had remained a simple line on a map proposal. Were it not for the project, it is likely the development of the American West would have been seriously impeded by this remoteness. The remarkable technical and engineering achievement of this first transcontinental railroad transformed the US from a regional backwater into a major power. The opening of this safe route, with the coinciding construction of the Suez Canal, finished the same year, shifted trade routes away from the southern hemisphere and towards the US. The 1860s also saw the rise to prominence of a class of industrial business barons, to the like of Thomas C. Durant, J.P. Morgan and Andrew Carnegie. They replaced the former plantation aristocracy, a class that had ruled US politics since the days of independence. Railroads would become a major sector of industry. The influence of railroad tycoons soared until they became effectively precedent makers by the end of the Gilded Age, playing a pivotal role in the election of the pro-business and pro-imperialism William McKinley. When Union Pacific and Central Pacific workers had met at Promontory Point in the northern Utah Territory on the 10th of May 1869, some had argued that it concluded an era of American westward expansion, that America had finally met her manifest destiny. However, plans for new transcontinental railroad were already being studied, and 3 new projects would eventually come to life in the following decade. Two years into his presidency, William McKinley signed a decree formalizing the annexation of Hawaii to the United States. America, it appeared, was not done with her manifest destiny.